Every Night is Game Night, Episode 40, Walter Barber from Greenbrier Games. Hey everybody, welcome back to Every Night is Game Night. This is Anthony with Jason once again, and I just want to thank you for stopping by, because this week we have a very special episode with Walter Barber. He is with Greenbrier Games, a designer of one of their upcoming releases, and he's going to talk to us about not only that, but some of the other games that Greenbrier is known for, including one of their most recent releases and a big hit for the solo community, Grimslingers. I was not, unfortunately, able to join the guys for their conversation, so we're going to go ahead and dive right in. Jason's going to take things away, and enjoy.
Maybe, just take a step back, introduce, well, first of all, let's, talk to the people who you are, and then your role within Greenbrier Games.
Greenbrier Games found me at Gen Con 2015. I had been creating a game for about 2.5-3 years prior to that, so started in 2012. The game is coming out very soon called Champions of Para. So for anyone who doesn't know, at conventions like Gen Con and a lot of others, they do publisher designer speed dating, where you basically enter this more or less competition a year ahead of time and pitch sell sheets through the organizers of this competition. And they're going to choose, I think it was 20 designers who would get to sit down at this event and have publishers come through like speed dating, and you demo the game very quickly and give them some pitching points. Then they either ask you to meet with them the next day or they walk away and don't talk to you again. I didn't know about this event until about an hour before. Definitely was not invited, did not sign up, but it sounded too good to pass up. So I kind of showed up anyway and set up my game next to the event and put up a sign like, hey, I'm looking for a publisher. And so Greenbrier Games came by and saw that. And then we had some meetings with them and we talked for a while. And anyway, they decided to sign the game. And then shortly thereafter, one of their team members transitioned on to work for another company, and they had a vacancy. And they were like, you're a somewhat competent young man who seems like he can keep it together. Why don't you do monkey stuff for us? So I've been working for Greenbrier Games for 1.5 years, and my time, I wear many hats for the company, but my time is kind of split between actual game design and development, which is the stuff that I really love doing, and more on the sales and marketing side of things, and sometimes even more on the customer service or community management side of things. So as a super small company, we all kind of have to wear a lot of different hats. And so Jason and Anthony had asked prior kind of some history about Greenbrier Games. They started as a 3-person team. I think the idea very first started was sparked in 2011, but they didn't actually become a company until 2012. And that was for the original Z-Apocalypse, which they brought to Kickstarter. I think at the time it was actually one of, if not the highest funded games on Kickstarter. And this was back in 2012 before Cool Mini or Not kind of blew everyone out of the water with their first campaign that sort of shaped the whole landscape, I feel. But from there, they've done a bunch of projects, some in-house, a lot of them working with other designers. But it's kind of an eclectic mix. So in 2016, end of 2015, I came onto the company, and so did Stephen Gibson, who is the creator and artist behind Grimslingers. And he is the new art director. He's shaped a lot of the games that you've seen since then. Grimslingers, the new face of Z-Apocalypse, which is Z-Apocalypse 2, Defend the Burbs. Folklore, The Affliction, which is going to be delivered to backers this August. These are all kind of his new art direction, which is sort of where we're taking the brand in this kind of new direction here. And that's the same kind of thing we'll see in Champions of Para, which will be coming out this fall.
Eventually, kind of leading into what you were saying, Stephen Gibson coming on in Grimslingers, I really feel like Grimslingers was the game that kind of caught my eye in terms of Greenbrier as a company.
Because it's so visually stunning, yeah.
Oh, the visuals. That's the first thing that anybody notices about that game is like, oh my god, this is not like any board game that I've seen.
And I think that's really what Steven strives for, is because he's very capable of doing more traditional art, but he wants to do things that are different. And I am very continually impressed by that.
And not just the art style, which we can kind of go on. I mean, this isn't an art critic podcast,
Sure.
but it way out of our competency there. But also the world building. Like, I definitely noticed that with Grimslingers, with a game we're going to talk about in a minute, of Dreams and Shadows, and some of your future releases. There's a lot that goes into the stories behind the world. Now, was that a decision that was made company wide? This is okay. This is going to make us a company. Is that something that's even conscious in your guys' part?
Absolutely. So good writing is really, really important to us. I mean, maybe even more so than beautiful art. Julie Ahern, who is the company's creative writer, she did like all the story stuff for Zpocalypse. She did a lot of the writing for Folklore. Stephen Gibson did all the writing for Grimslingers, and Gordon Alford, who's the designer of Dreams and Shadows, did all the writing for those games. But that is pretty much was kind of what it came down to when we were deciding whether or not we should make these games part of Greenbrier, was that we were so floored with how, I mean, with Grimslingers, you get a lot of that like lighthearted but dark still and edgy stuff. And with Of Dreams and Shadows, I feel like you get a lot of subverting of some fantasy tropes that were just, I think, excellent. And so those were huge decision factors for us.
So then I guess, talking to I guess a lot of what this podcast is about, not just introducing the game, but the companies that are, kind of into the solo thing. Like we talked about on email, solo design is a pretty important part of what Greenbrier does. Familiarizing the community with Greenbrier, like you guys are the, great art, great story, great world building, and some good gameplay attached to that too. Would that be kind of a good way to sum it up, or is there?
I think that's what we strive for, absolutely, and I think more and more that's going to be our focus going forward. And the world building, especially. I mean, like I was going to say anyone can write beautiful prose. I don't think that's true, of course. But being able to, you have such limited space in a board game, and you can't patch it. You can't add more content without investing like a lot of time and energy into it. I mean, you can do PDF campaign stuff, but that's really looking at a very, very small portion of your audience that's going to actually follow through and engage with PDF content, I think. So you've got such a limited window to tell a story that it's so important that every card, every page counts. Like, never skimp on flavor text is kind of our motto.
You are unique among game designers, a lot of them, in saying that. The flavor text seems like such a throwaway in a lot of these other games.
I put more hours than I care to discuss into flavor text on things like Zpoc and Champions of Horror. I wish that I had been able to do some more flavor text type stuff for Grimslingers, but that's pretty much a one-man band. I've been much more involved with the expansion in Northern Territory, but as far as the world and the story content is pretty much just Steven.
So let's take a step back. Not all of our community might be familiar with Grimslingers, so maybe we can kind of just break down the gameplay a little bit and then take it from there.
Gotcha, absolutely. It's a dark fantasy sci-fi western in the vein of things like The Dark Tower. Basically, we are all living in the Forgotten West, which is essentially a purgatory-like space. And there's a lot of different types of creatures and life forms that live in the Forgotten West, but there's one individual whose name is Icarus, who is a robot, for lack of a better term, finds people who are really down on their luck. And if you're down on your luck in purgatory, you're really down on your luck. And he brings them back to his laboratory, and for the most part, without consent, turns them into magical Frankenstein robot witches. Grimslingers. So
turns them into how many things?
A lot of weird stuff. He packs you full of magic and metal and sends you out on a quest. And the quest starts with, okay, you need to learn how to use your powers. So Grimslingers is a game sort of in two parts. The first part being the competitive player versus player, which is either a one-on-one game, a team fight, or a free-for-all. And then moves on once you kind of master those pieces into the cooperative campaign, where you're utilizing everything and taking it now as a team, and you're fighting monsters and other weird baddies the same way that you would fight players, but then you mix in a lot of story stuff, whether that's straight linear narrative or some of the random events that pop up on you. And one of the beautiful things I think about Grimslingers is that it's a game that kind of teaches itself in parts. So, I mean, I don't know the rule book of some of the editions, and we're now on our third printing of it, so we're kind of refining this rule book every time, trying to make this more and more how people will experience it. But it's a game that's so wonderful to demo for people because we can really do it in stages, where first we play with the most basic version of the game, where we have just the element spells, and everyone has the exact same tools, and it's sort of this rock, paper, scissors, like mind game that you're playing with each other, and you're card counting, and it's quick and it's fast. And then from there, we add in these other layers, my favorite being the signature spells, which all do wacky different things, followed by items, and then eventually character classes. And then once you kind of get all those pieces down, you start moving into the multiplayer variants, which add tons of different strategies and ways of thinking about the cards as they already are. And then it then builds into that story in a way that I think just works out quite well.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting game because I don't think I've encountered a game that feels as different, co-op and competitive. So like the competitive, it's like a really quick boom, 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 boom. You know, at bigger player counts, it almost feels like chaotic, right. And it's over really fast. But the campaign mode is this kind of 60 to 90 minute thing where you're building your deck, you're improving your character, you're leveling. It's just like, it's almost like two separate, like it's the same game, but it's almost like two separate experiences in the box, to the point where usually in a game you could tell which came first, the co-op or the solo, or you know, which mode came first and which mode is the variant on the original thing. I don't know if I can tell that in Grimslingers. So if you could tell a little bit about the development of the game. Yeah,
so let me see actually if I can find the video for you guys. Grimslingers actually started as an app that Steven was working on for a while, called High Moon. It was sort of an 8-bit kind of pixel thing. I think he maybe took it down. Oh, no, here it is. High Moon gameplay. I'll shoot you guys this link here. And it was just the versus portion of it. And I think he was eventually hoping that the app form of it would also move on to the co-op side of things. Here it is here. And you can kind of see where some of those thoughts originated from. So it started as this versus mode, and then built as he built the world around it into the co-op stuff. He's a guy who's really obsessed with lots of different lore and superstitions and things like that, and so you can really feel a lot of those different sources built into that narrative.
Mm-hmm. So I did want to get to criticism that some people have of the game, in the sense that the basic mechanic is kind of this rock, paper, scissors thing, right? So it's like each of the elements kind of defeat each other, so fire and ice and wind, or whatever the combination of elements are. And then there's a lot that's, like you were saying before, like a lot gets introduced on top of that. So like the items and the spells. And for some players, they feel like all of that extra stuff doesn't do enough to mitigate that core kind of, you know, rock, paper, scissors, which is kind of a guessing game. Have you encountered that, and how would you respond to that?
Oh, well, first I'd say that it is absolutely a valid criticism on your first few playthroughs. I think as you play the game more, you find that there are a lot more layers than just the rock, paper, scissors, shoot aspect of it. So that would be the first thing I say, is that it's totally a valid criticism. I think that if you give it the time and really try out all the things that even just the versus mode has for you, and like in strategic form, and it really like does kind of depend on you knowing the person you're playing against and already having that relationship. Like, okay, are Jason and Anthony the kinds of guys who start with lightning, or do they start with earth, thinking I'm the guy who starts with lightning, kind of thing like that. So of course that's a valid criticism in that form. But I think one of the things I'm most excited about, just in the gaming community in general, but for Grimslingers and Greenbrier, is Grimslingers in Northern Territory, which is the expansion that just had a Kickstarter. It's going to be delivered to backers this December. And we heard all that criticism. Absolutely. And so this game this expansion is not more of the same. It actually kind of shakes a lot of what's going on up and turns things on their heads here. So the biggest thing in that is that it really reduces luck. I think there is definitely a place for luck in games, and it's very important for games to be replayable and fun, etc. But in the new game, we took a lot of that down. So one of the core mechanics of the first game is when you play elements that don't beat each other, like somebody plays fire and the other person plays earth, for example, two elements that don't say that they beat one another, you would solve it by playing a mini game of blackjack. And one of the complaints is that mini game of blackjack does feel very random because you don't have that much control over what's going on. So we actually removed that component of the game and replaced it with, now you've got your element spells, but each character also has a set of their own character skills. So each of the characters that are in the Northern Territory have their own unique resource that's specific to that character, and they have a set of 8 skills. And in the cooperative, the new campaign, you've got to earn those skills over time. But in the versus mode, you're going to choose 4 of those 8 skills and kind of spec your character when you go into the game. And those have no bearing on the rock, paper, scissors, shoot component of it. So it becomes a much, much smaller aspect of the game, and the game becomes a lot more of this just simultaneous action, like trick-taking sort of thing.
Okay, so then Northern Territory was really your guys' effort to kind of answer some of the community stuff, and then also just more world building, bigger. That's the thing that stood out to me, was a bigger campaign. Like, the campaign in the base boxes, you can get through it pretty fast, relatively, for a campaign.
Right. If you've got a big group, you could do it in a night. It's probably like 4 to 6 hours of campaign. I think we say 6 to 8, but if you're really committed going through it, you could probably do it a bit faster. So the entire campaign of the core game takes place in one zone, the Valley of Death, which is part of the Forgotten West. The campaign that's in the Northern Territory takes place over 5 different zones, and the way we do zones are a bit different. So in the core game, you've got one map that you're looking at the whole time. And in the new campaign, the maps are procedurally generated every time you go in. So when we took out that little blackjack component, we took out the small poker deck and replaced it with a full 52 card. Actually, it's more than that because we put in some other cards, but it's a fully functioning poker deck. And you use that to what I call procedurally generate. So you're automating these semi-random map zones. So when you're going through the booklet, it tells you, okay, when you get into the Red River area, you're going to pull out, let's say, 2 queens, all 4 jacks, the numbers 1 through 10, and an ace. We're going to put the queens face up here and here, and then you're going to shuffle all the other cards and set them up face down in this arrangement. And now you've got a semi-random zone that you move through. And each card that your group moves onto is it's an area tile in that zone. So it's a new thing. You flip over that card, and the different cards correspond to different things in that zone, whether it means you draw a random event, or you face a certain story moment, or you fight a different selection of monsters that are sort of tailored to that zone with different modifiers, etc. So the big push was to make it feel more like an open world. I think one of our quests as a company is to really like simulate the MMO experience as much as possible in this collaborative storytelling space, in this tabletop area where we have this interaction instead of being segregated by a screen. So between that and this, like, the semi-random element of it, that I think it adds so much more replayability to the campaign. And then Steven kind of went above and beyond by adding things like bounty boards and reasons to explore the different areas when you're not even actually on the core quests. Mm-hmm. And also the core game is sort of one linear path with no branching forks. And the new campaign story actually has several different branching forks where you get to different endings, etc.
No, that sounds awesome. Speaking of the open world, it made me think of, just to kind of hop over to the other game, of Dreams and Shadows. So of Dreams and Shadows is, it's a board. You mean you don't kind of leap off the board or anything like that, but right. It really does feel like, there's a lot of freedom in terms of where you go. So maybe tell the people a little bit about Of Dreams and Shadows. We can talk about it a little bit.
Totally. So Of Dreams and Shadows is on a bit of a larger scale in some ways than Grimslingers. Like you said, you're on this big map And it is more of a traditional fantasy than sort of the dark fantasy sci-fi western that's going on in Grimslingers. But it does, I think, a fair amount to kind of subvert some of those fantasy tropes. So in this game, everyone plays as a hero. You've got a different card with asymmetrical stats, abilities, starting locations. You're doing some of the traditional RPG things like collecting items, getting new spells, leveling up, etc. But one of my favorite things about the game and sort of the core feature of it is that at the beginning you choose a villain. And that villain sort of shapes the whole experience. It's going to choose what quests are available to you as you're going. And it's going to affect what monsters come out across the board. And so each villain is kind of its own scenario.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what stood out about that one is, like you were saying before, like the flavor text, like every single time you do anything, like even like the fight, because so you'll go around, you'll fight these monsters, and then so like the fight has a story, and then you have pull an event card, and the event has a story, and then you're interacting with the big boss, and the big boss is a story. So it seems like a lot to kind of take on, and it also trying to get the gameplay down too.
Absolutely. And I think for a first time playing through Of Dreams and Shadows, you're going to kind of feel like, oh, like maybe how was this story that I had over here in the Plains area related to what happened to me over here in this cavernous hollows area? And it sometimes, for just kind of a quick reading through of things, feels unconnected. And then it just really rewards playing through multiple times, and you feel like, oh man, that was something that affected me over here, and like in a narrative level, not always necessarily in a mechanical level. But one thing that I'm really excited about is the expansion that's coming out for Of Dreams and Shadows, which is The Monster Within. And in the core game, when you defeat a boss, you usually have a choice of how you're going to deal with that boss. Like when you defeat Morgaine, you've got an option. Do you like leave her tied up, or do you kill her? And that choice that you make with Morgaine is going to affect which of the branching scenarios you go into in the expansion. So it's sort of this mini legacy kind of feel to it, which I think just adds another level to the world building that Gordon has done.
That you mentioned legacy. I mean, narrative and legacy go hand in hand, right? I mean, is that something that Greenbrier is interested in, like a legacy project, or is that you can't tell me right now?
It's definitely something that I am interested in. It's something that I kind of, and this is going to sound odd, maybe want to walk the line of a little bit, because, I mean, for me and my own personal taste, but I think in the community on a whole, legacy games are sort of polarizing, in that it sounds really exciting to a lot of us, but isn't necessarily achievable, because not everyone has dedicated groups that they get to play with all the time. And in some ways, that legacy thing can be isolating. Like, oh, I can only play this game with this one group, and I've sort of sectioned it off as something I can only do then and can't enjoy on my own. So, I mean, something that we're trying to do with the Northern Territory is reward a player for example, a solo player who is maybe the core gamer in their group. They've got friends who love games, but only when they're the one who comes in and is like, hey guys, we should sit down and play this game. Rewarding them for actually playing portions of the game on their own with horizontal progression. So when they sat down to play with their friends, they're not necessarily more powerful than everyone. Maybe they have a few more options. They maybe feel more awesome in certain ways that allows them to continue to guide the group the way that they are doing in the real world, but also here in the game. So with legacy stuff, with Champions of Hara, for example, like it's something that I kind of want to pepper in that you're rewarded for playing the game over multiple sessions, but you're not required to, which is something that's really important to me, because I think I kind of want to cater to both sides of that. People who want to sit down and just like, I'm only going to get to play this game with this group of people one time because maybe I'm never going to see them again because we just met at a game cafe, or maybe because we're on the go traveling or what have you. But give them the incentive to care about it beyond just a single play session.
Mm-hmm. Like, I think, listening to Rob Davio, he's looking forward to how different designers take Hit Legacy. Like the way he did it was very, very static play group, and you generally can't play. You definitely couldn't play Pandemic after the fact. Seafall I'm not really too sure about. 'Cause I didn't finish that, but so like I think as more people are getting into it, so like Jamie Stegmaier had it, Centauri Saga just kind of wrapped up their Kickstarter with Legacy. There's that, I think what you're talking about, like being responsive to the community, saying, okay, what's this parts of Legacy that are not kind of working so well? So like, that isolationist thing, that I can't replay it thing, that, even if the number of plays is like 100, if the number of plays is not infinite, then people are unhappy. So, so, I mean, but it just sounds like something that would be right up Greenbrier's alley kind of in the future, given your emphasis on world building and stuff.
Absolutely. And I think, I unfortunately haven't actually gotten a chance to play it yet, but I'm eagerly awaiting the delivery from the Kickstarter. But I think if anyone's doing it right, it appears to be Gloomhaven that's doing it. So
you and me both. We're waiting for that.
They seem to be doing everything right. Stupid Isaac, whatever.
So let's talk about so you've been mentioning Chapters of Horror. That's your baby. So definitely want to hear a little bit more about that and some other future Greenbrier projects.
So Champions of Horror, let me put it to you this way, since we had just talked about Gloomhaven, but I would say Gloomhaven is to World of Warcraft that Champions of Horror is to a game like Dota or League of Legends or Heroes of the Storm or a MOBA. So Champions of Horror it's an adventure game, but it sort of crosses the line between arena and adventure. So like Grimslingers, it has two completely separate play modes. One is just versus, where you guys are competing, and the other is these cooperative scenarios. So basically, Horror is essentially a mystical afterlife that certain very select life forms from all different planets and universes get pulled into right in their darkest hour, right before death. You get pulled into this world, and you're brought here, and it's this beautiful plane, but it is dying. It's falling apart. It's in this sort of cycle of chaos, and you are tasked with collecting the wayward, unstable energy, these rifts, and containing the energy in these monsters that are sort of destroying the plane. And you are given a reward. So if you are able to contain enough of this energy, you are given a single wish by the stewards of Hara. And unfortunately, that wish can't be to return back to your old life. There are a couple limitations, but you're given a wish that allows you to kind of shape the world. So this is kind of where I'm leaning in towards some of the legacy components. But in the core game, each character has two wish options. There's 6 main characters, and it is very much a character-driven game, like the MOBAs that I was referencing. Each character has 2 wish options, and those wishes are the cooperative scenarios that you can then play. And so you're rewarded for playing what's called a story arc, which is everyone sitting down to play the versus arena. A winner, a champion is chosen from that, and that champion then has 2 stories that they can pick from that you guys will then play this cooperative scenario. So it can be played as a story arc, but can also be played completely separate from that, where you guys can just sit down and play this 90-minute arena, or you can just sit down and play this 90-minute story totally separate. They don't have to be connected, but you are rewarded for doing them connected, because then you're going to get the minor legacy component, which is if you've completed the scenario that goes with your character, you get to add a new card to that character's arsenal, which is a permanent bonus to you as that player.
Nice. All right. And so you also Folklore of the Affliction is delivering pretty soon to backers, right?
Oh God, I can't wait to get this to people. This game has been a huge project. The Kickstarter that they did for it was actually right before I became part of the company. They were finishing it up as they were in talks with us for signing Champions of Hara. It was their largest Kickstarter to date, their largest project ever. It's this extremely ambitious, massive game, and they promised a lot in the Kickstarter. So we've spent the past year and a half finishing that, and sort of, I would say, at the finish line, we were like, okay, screw it. Let's have Stephen Gibson redo all the art. So it got the full Grimslingers treatment. A lot of people haven't even seen the beautiful work that he's done for it. There's bits and pieces of it out on the internet, but we are so excited for when those boxes get delivered this August. It's a dark fantasy, so it's set in sort of an alternate medieval Europe, and it is one very long story. The core game, I think, it's about 10 hours of story, and the expansion, the Dark Tales expansion, is like another 15. So there's quite a bit, and then there's a few more minor expansions coming out. And it does a fantastic job of capturing, and of course, this is sort of a thing that a lot of games are trying to do right now, of capturing the RPG feel without a game master. But I think it really does a brilliant job of streamlining that experience. It's very approachable. So I think it's going to be one that's really easy to get people who aren't hardcore gamers to get into, and reward the hardcore gamers for really sitting down and strategizing on it as well.
So another big cooperative adventure game to sink people's teeth into. So it's kind of a tough to get into that space because it's so crowded. So I think you guys are smart to kind of lean on, some of the stuff that's within your control, like better art and, a fleshier story. And then once people kind of get into that, then they may discover, oh, these are mechanics that are new, that are not just run of the mill. So.
And I can definitely say with confidence that we are, though we love the big cooperative RPG story games, these massive games, that I think the next 4 projects we have slated are much smaller, and they're much lighter, and they're more competitive based. So we're kind of rounding out the catalog, because we have, we started with Zpocalypse, which was a story game, and then went for a few more of these smaller competitive games like Yashima, and then really sunk our teeth into folklore. And I think Grimslingers and Champions of Horror are these two, and Of Dreams and Shadows, but Of Dreams and Shadows being of the former of these larger cooperative deep story games, and Grimslingers and Champions of Horror being games that are kind of positioned in the middle, where they have sort of both elements. And we're going to kind of make our next few projects more on the lighter side. I mean, they'll still be very much about the world building and story, but they're going to be lighter games. And because, like you said, because that space it is extremely crowded. In a good way. I mean, I'm thankful because those are the games that I get excited about. I mean, I haven't opened my Kingdom Death box yet because I'm scared of how much time it's going to take.
Well, if trading in the Mediterranean and trading sheep for wool can be crowded, then it's okay that this is crowded too.
That's very true.
So this has been great. Thank you so much. This is Walter Barber working with Greenbrier Games. You can be found at greenbriergames.com, and the Twitter and the Facebook and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you the link so you can put them in with the video, but we are on all the major social medias.
All right. So thank you very much for joining us.
If anyone listening is still interested, the Grimslingers Northern Territory Kickstarter campaign is closed, but we are taking late pledges throughout until the end of August, and then that's going to be closed off as well. So if you're interested, you can find the links over at www.greenbriergames.com.
Cool, man. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Have a great night.
All right, guys, that's going to go ahead and be everything for this week's episode of Every Night is Game Night. Once again, thank you, Walter, for coming on, and thank you, Jason, for holding down the fort while I was away. Guys, if you haven't had a chance yet, check us out on Facebook. The Board Gamers Anonymous page is growing rapidly. Having some great conversations there with a lot of you, as well as the Board Gamers Anonymous listeners. You can catch us on Twitter at ENGN_podcast. Also have the guild on Board Game Geek 1735. If you have not yet, check out BoardGamersAnonymous.com. You'll find all of these episodes and the show notes for everything, including this interview. And if you haven't had a chance yet, we'd really appreciate it. Stop on by, leave a quick review on iTunes. 5 stars goes a long way, helps more people find the podcast, shows us that you're listening, but also helps introduce solo games to more people. So that's going to go ahead and be everything for this week. So until next week, grab a solo game off the shelf and let's make every night game night.